As we've mentioned, there's a lot of hard news. So it does get difficult to find these. But more and more, what I'm trying to do is go back to the original intent of daily distractions, which is to find sort of the spin. The news content itself may be valid, but the spin is what I'm talking about and how it can be distracting from what I think the real story is. And this article actually came out right after our last show. This came out on the 12th of May. And this is a Newsweek article. And it's kind of funny because it's very topical now because Arizona is basically back open. Officially, Arizona's back open. In fact, I think gyms are kind of like the last thing. And I think gyms were allowed to open today, if not last week. But I am aware of several gyms that have opened today in Arizona. So
yeah,
this
my
is
gym's back open. I got an email a couple days ago.
I don't think mine is, by the way, which I have to look into that because I'm a little upset about that. And I'm like, hey, why am I paying you guys if you guys are allowed to open and you're not going to open? Why am I paying for you guys? Because personally, I wanted to support them. You know, I didn't cancel my gym membership because I did want to support them during the close down because they were forced to close. But if they choose to close, well, this actually gets into this article here. So it says the headline reads, hundreds of Arizona business owners sign a letter saying they won't reopen as it's, quote, too soon. And it says more than 250 business owners in Arizona have signed a letter stating they will not be reopening their doors to the public despite having been given the go-ahead to do so, fearing it is still too soon due to the coronavirus outbreak. Businesses ranging from restaurants, retailers, and salons said that while they are desperate to return to normal, the number of coronavirus cases in the state and across the U.S. mean that things are not normal. Quote, we feel proceeding cautiously with the reopening of businesses will worsen human suffering in our communities and prolong the negative impact this pandemic is having on small businesses and the economy, unquote. The letter posted on the Too Soon Arizona website states. Now, I am not familiar with Too Soon Arizona. I don't know who backs this. I don't know where the money comes from. It's something I'm going to be looking into in the future. But I'll tell you, this to me really is a distraction because the real news in Arizona is that businesses are open, that Arizona is open again, and that we're kind of trying to lead the charge right now to opening up the economy and opening up the rest of the country. And in a lot of ways, Arizona is going to be a leader in this. In a lot of ways, Arizona is going to be a guinea pig for this, right? And that's what the real story is to me, and that's why I think it's a distraction. Pete, what are your thoughts?
Well, I do think that in a way we're a guinea pig, but I have to say I don't know that the lockdowns are all that effective. Just forcing everybody to stay at home and forcing businesses to shut down, to my mind, that's not all that effective because we've seen with Sweden, even though Sweden has had a very high rate compared to its closest neighbors of Norway and Denmark,
but their rate is very similar to the U.S. I think that's
very similar to the U.S. Yes,
it's very similar to the U.S.
And they're seeing a similar pattern, which is that the deaths went way up, and now they're trailing off slowly. A lot of people, I don't know if you remember the charts when this first started. Everything was, well, it'll go straight up and then it'll drop right down. I remember that famous chart of what Philadelphia looked like, and we got to flatten the curve. And Sweden does have a flat curve right now. They jumped up quickly, but then it has gone down slowly. So it actually looks, the shape of it looks like the St. Louis curve, not the Philadelphia curve. So I think it's very interesting. So to get back to these businesses in Arizona, I don't know from a health perspective that there's a lot of merit to saying it's too soon. I think there's a lot of variables we just don't know, and you can never be sure what the results are going to be of doing something like this. I think they're worried about the business repercussions. What happens if the customers don't come back right away because they're not sure, and then their creditors perhaps say to them, well, you're allowed to reopen. You should be, just like with your gym. You're paying so long as they're not being forced to close. Now, you may have had a different situation, but I know my gym membership shut off when the lockdown happened. I wasn't expected to pay for it.
Oh, but you got a better gym than I do.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. If they're charging you when they're closed, they're forced to be closed. You can't go. But if you know if you don't go to the gym, you still have the membership. Well, they'll still charge you, right? And I think that's what these business owners are worried about. I think there might be a business angle there, but I think you're right. This is a distraction because this is trying to whip up fear about what happens if we reopen too soon. And of course, there are consequences on the other side. This is very unbalanced. It's like saying, I don't know if you've seen similar articles to this where they've talked about, oh, people are being ordered back to work, forced to go back to work and not take unemployment benefits. Yeah. And so somehow
I have seen articles like that. Yep.
Yeah. So somehow the fear is we won't send people back, that we will send people back to work. They won't get their unemployment benefits and they'll die at work. And I don't think there's a real understanding of what's going on here, which is when people aren't working, we're not producing. Somebody has to produce the food that you put on your table. We don't have 6 months of food stockpiled to feed everybody in the United States.
And the fact of the matter is, when we talk about that, grocery workers have been having to work in many instances without any personal protective equipment, without so much as a face covering or gloves, because especially early on, I saw that rampant at my grocery store. So to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't. I will say this: when I went out, I decided to go out. Monday was the first time that I was able to go to a sit down restaurant. I actually went to an Olive Garden. That's the closest restaurant to my house. I can walk there very easily. And everybody, all the servers were wearing masks. They were wearing gloves. They were being very careful. Olive Garden doesn't have that ability. At least the one by me doesn't have like the very classic booth style seating. So what they did is they did a lot of spacing. So like each section, which normally would accommodate, let's say 5 tables, would have like 2 or 3. You know what I mean? That were actually allowed to be occupied. The rest were shut down. It was very much like a ghost town, but in an intentional ghost town. Not for lack of business, but because of the way that they are spacing people. Then later in the week on Friday, I went to a Denny's. And Denny's actually had they basically closed down the tables. The booths are open, but they have those like plexiglass shields in between the booths, which I think is also responsible. All the servers were wearing masks. They were wearing gloves. To me, it's not about a 0 point. It's about mitigation. We know that people are still going to get infected. That was going to happen anyway because we still had grocery stores open. We still had hardware stores open. People were still going out. In fact, I don't know if you saw, there was a big street party in Florida where there were arrests made recently and things like that. People are still going to do things. So what we have to do is mitigate, and we have to get people into a behavior that is going to help us keep that curve flat and things like that. Because I think right now what you're seeing is a lot of quarantine fatigue, and people are starting to go out. They're getting restless, and we're talking about civil disruptions and protests and all those kinds of things. And that's not good. It's just not good. That doesn't help the situation in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, you're right. I think we all feel restless. I know I feel restless. Even wanting to talk about, how much do we want to talk about coronavirus tonight? I think we're all just sick of it. I love numbers. I love charts, but I am so over it. And I want to point out something you said very early on in this podcast. I don't mean tonight, but like the first week we had this podcast, you said there's a danger of both underreacting and overreacting. And I wasn't really sure what you meant. I know you had the experience as a first responder, but I wasn't quite sure what you meant. And now I know exactly what you mean. We're shutting down businesses. Yeah, we're shutting down businesses, which is very high cost, but we're not giving people masks, which is very low cost, or gloves, or whatever. And people are coming up with all kinds of crazy reasons to not wear masks. Oh, it'll cut off your air supply. No, it won't. Oh, it's going to be infected in Germany and you'll get sick. And no, you probably won't. But people are just losing their minds. They want to do something. They want to add something to the conversation, I think. And they're just going bonkers.
Well, I do want to just mention this because a mask has been something that people have been talking about a lot. And I think a lot of it is because you have states that are requiring people to wear masks when they go outside. And a lot of people are upset about that, especially from a liberty perspective. But don't let that make you decide that masks are bad. remember, the reason that we were not told to wear masks initially was because of the supply shortage. Okay, that's just a fact. Okay, that's just what happened. If you look at all the wealthy Asian countries like South Korea, Japan, you look at China, you look at Hong Kong, any of the wealthy Asian countries, they all have different approaches to the coronavirus. Japan has almost done nothing. Japan is almost like Sweden. They've done almost nothing. The only commonality they have are lower numbers in the West. That's a fact. They have lower numbers in the West compared to their populations. In other words, less of a rate of infection, and they all wear masks. They all wear masks. That's the only commonality they have. That's it. That's the only common approach they have in those countries is they wear masks. I don't know what else to say. So,
well, yeah, you brought up the peer-reviewed research at the very beginning that we've done studies on this. This isn't the first time there's been a disease like COVID-19. This isn't our first rodeo. And so there's been research. How effective are homemade masks? And the answer is not 100% effective. It doesn't have to be. The point is, it will do something. It will make you safer. It's a very inexpensive thing that you can do to make yourself and the people around you a little safer when you're in confined spaces, especially, and out in public. If you're at home, okay, you know, everybody around you that you live with, if you have it, they already have it. But the scientific research says that masks absolutely can make a difference. And if you're a carrier and you don't know if you have it, it could mean the difference between life and death for somebody else.
absolutely. Absolutely.